Made possible through support from PASCO, Personal Assistance Services of Colorado, the ARC of Aurora, CCDC, Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, and Developmental Pathways. A Think Change training.
Hey there, this is Jeff, and
I'm Petrie. We are advocates with the ARC of Aurora, and we are here today to offer a Think Change training on a specific topic as it pertains to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And today we are discussing
behavior plans and how they relate to the IEP.
Fantastic. So I might get us started and just kind of share a little bit with you about what a behavior plan is.
And could you clarify, by the way, is a BIP a BIP?
I've got
the
it
same thing?
right there, my friend.
Well,
BIP.
tell us about it.
You might hear it referred to as a behavior plan, a BIP. BIP stands for Behavior Intervention Plan. So a lot of times you will hear it by the acronym. But what it is, it's used to document positive behavior interventions, supports, and strategies to address behaviors that impede a child's ability to access their education. It also sometimes can be put in place when it impedes other students.
But what do you mean by impede?
When the behavior gets in the way of the child being able to access their education, when it gets in the way of the child being able to even stay in the classroom setting because the behaviors may be so problematic. Clarity help?
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. So how do you create a behavior plan? You gather a lot of different information on the student from a variety of formal and even informal settings, and you profile the student's strengths, the positive relationships they may have, their interests, their talents, just to kind of see what motivates them, what does encourage them to behave in a more positive manner, to stay in the classroom, to engage with the teacher and the other students. And then once you have all of that data, you create a strategy around that information. And typically a behavior plan takes place kind of on a worksheet. There are 4 categories that then are tracked not only with data, but the strategies are then put in place in these 4 categories. And the first one is the setting event. And these are strategies that are put in place to try and reduce or even prevent the behaviors that are occurring. Then we have the antecedent, and that is the immediate predictor, or in other words, what's actually triggered the behavior. Right? So we're trying to learn what those things are so that then we know now what does trigger a behavior. We can start to eliminate those things for the student. Then we look at something called behavior teaching. And basically what that is offering the student alternative behavior and coping skills. And then the 4th one is reinforcement, which is basically consequences. And it's consequences that then make the problem behaviors less effective as time goes on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so that typically is put in place as an addition to the IEP. And sometimes it's tied in with an FBA and sometimes it isn't. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about the FBA. First of all, I'm sure you want to know what that stands for.
Yes.
It stands for Functional Behavior Assessment or Analysis. It's the same thing.
You might hear it both ways.
Functional Behavior Analysis. It's basically the same thing. It's an FBA. One thing I want you to really know as a parent, if you're seeing some problems with behavior in school and you're getting a little worried, why is this going on, what's happening, you can request an FBA.
Absolutely.
Did you know that?
Yeah, that's great.
A teacher can also request an FBA. Someone that works directly with the student, if they see a need for an FBA, they can request it. Now, who's going to do the FBA? Well, it could be a variety of people. It could be the teacher that does it. It could be the school psychologist. It could be the school social worker. It could even be another person on the team that is going to be able to put constant eyes on the child to collect data.
Yeah.
So basically when you're doing a functional behavior assessment, you're picking out some behaviors that are problematic. Let's say the behavior is hitting.
Okay.
So you're going to do functional behavior assessment around hitting other people. So what they do, whoever is going to do the FBA, They're going to gather the data, but they need to be in multiple settings, multiple times a day, because we got to see when this behavior is happening and why it's happening. And that's the whole point of the FBA.
So like looking for a pattern, essentially.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll notice it happens in the morning.
Right.
And is that because the child isn't having breakfast and they're just really hungry and they don't have the behavior after lunch because
they've had their lunch?
Yeah.
Or was the bus ride really stressful and chaotic?
So these assessments are really useful. A lot can be found out by the FBA, but really when they're seeing the behavior, they're collecting the data on what happened before, which is the antecedent.
Yep.
And then they're looking at the function. Okay, so after he hits or she hits somebody, this happens. So that's the function of the behavior. There's basically 3 functions of every behavior that comes through in these FBAs. One is attention, or, the second one that's very popular as well is escape or avoidance. And then the third, which is less common, is physical enjoyment or some kind of physical pleasure. Whatever the function of the behavior is determined, that is how you could come up with a plan to replace that behavior or to add supports to change that behavior into a more desirable behavior. If a student has a manifestation and it's determined that their disability is why this behavior is occurring, and there has been no FBA to that point, there has to be an FBA after that.
Yeah, absolutely.
There has to be an FBA. And an FBA then can be used to create a behavior plan, but I don't believe you need to have an FBA to have a behavior plan.
I think they can stand alone sometimes, yes, for sure.
Okay. So, overall though, a functional behavior assessment is a very useful tool to help problem solve in the area of behavior for a child.
Yeah. So let's say now that's in place and we have a behavior plan in place or a BIP for the student, and you don't feel that it's really working and it's not curtailing these behaviors, you don't see any changes in a positive direction, then what is your recourse? What's next?
Say that again?
So if you have a behavior plan in place, but you don't feel that it's necessarily working for your child, the behaviors aren't decreasing, you don't feel it's really the proper reinforcements for this child, then what do you do next if you just don't feel like this behavior plan is working for your child?
I would ask for a functional behavior assessment.
Yeah, okay. And then even if all of that kind of comes together and you still don't necessarily feel like that's working, you can always bring the team back together and just say, we don't feel like this is working. What can we do to take next steps? So
you can essentially call an IEP meeting, get the whole team together. It doesn't have to be what we discussed earlier, an annual or a triennial. Like you could call an IEP team together to discuss behavior concerns.
Absolutely.
And I encourage you to do that. You don't want to wait until the next IEP to address any kind of behavior concerns.
That's right. And as behaviors begin to escalate, that could put your child in jeopardy of being suspended, expulsion, and you certainly don't want to start that whole kind of back and forth situation for your child when you can maybe kind of nip that in the bud with a behavior plan in the beginning.
And so I have a recommendation. If you are going to do an FBA or if there's any kind of IEP meeting related strictly to behavior, if you have an ABA therapist at home, invite them to the meeting. They have a lot of input and insight into this child that a lot of the people in the school might not have. And they can definitely collaborate with the team and help come up with some good solutions.
That's a really good point, because a lot of times what we talk about in these meetings is we see behaviors in the school that the parents don't see at home, or vice versa. And so a lot of times you really want to try and bridge the gap between the students' environments so that everyone's kind of working collaboratively together to help support the child. And we are seeing now more of a trend where outside supports are willing to come in and collaborate with the school. And the school, many of the schools now are willing to have that collaboration so that the child is receiving the same strategies, the same input, the same messaging, so that they can be successful across all of their environments. So
and
thanks for pointing that out.
An example on a small scale of that. So I was at a meeting once where eye contact of the child was being discussed. And the teacher said, I cannot get this child to give me eye contact when I'm speaking to the child. We had an ABA therapist at that meeting. The ABA therapist said, oh, just say, I want to see your eyeballs. Look at my eyeballs. And that language, the eyeball, was the word that this kid would give you eye contact, but this child was used to the term eyeballs.
Yeah.
I need to see eyeballs. And then that piece of information was used by the teacher, and it came from an outside, resource,
Yeah.
which is the ABA therapist.
So that's a great example of how, someone outside of the school might have some insight to help the child and the teacher be more successful with each other.
Great. Well, I think that's about all for behavior plans and FBAs.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will be offering up more THINK+change trainings. They will be coming to you soon, so please stay tuned.